project partners for another great venue, even if it is a bit hard to find. For those of you that haven't been to one of our discussion groups before, BZD is a climate solutions think tank and research organisation. Our goal is to transform Australia from a 19th century fossil fuel based economy to a 21st century renewable powered clean tech economy. Our projects include Zero Carbon Australia Research, Repower Australia Talks, Zero Carbon Communities, media work, education programs and much more. We're always looking for more volunteers, so come and talk to us afterwards if you'd like to get involved. This discussion group is a forum for climate change solutions with presentations by experts in the field and is held on the first Monday of every month. This evening we have Matt Grantham, who recently completed his Masters of Applied Finance at Macquarie University, where he studied the demerger of E.ON in Germany, which is one of the world's largest electric utility services. Matt recently published a series of articles in Renew Economy on this topic of a utilities guide for a brown to green transition. He's also recorded some podcasts which are available on the BZD website, and is a part-time presenter on BZD Radio, where he's interviewed guests from GreenSync, Power Ledger, Greensmith, and many other energy companies. We'll hand over to Matt to tell us all about it. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you everyone. We'll try and keep this nice and informal. This is going to be more like a curated meeting than a presentation. As has been pointed out, the talk is on corporate strategy for utilities, a lesson from Europe, and it is indeed about the demerger of E.ON, and specifically about the sort of corporate strategy stuff that underpinned that. I do realise that when you see corporate strategy for utilities, it doesn't scream excitement for a lot of people. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that none of you lost any sleep last night sitting on the edge of your seats, waiting for the moment where you came along to listen to a talk on corporate strategy for utilities. But it's good that everyone has come along tonight. Essentially, I'd also like to sort of start out by also thanking, I'll just go through the sort of the format of what we're going to discuss tonight. So I'd like to thank Macquarie Applied Finance. The subject I did was called Managing Shareholder Value as part of the Macquarie course, and if anyone's interested in doing a Master of Applied Finance, I can recommend Macquarie. It's a particularly good course, and a special thanks probably should go out to my lecturers, Tony Carlton, Roger Casey, who allowed me to do this sort of fairly unique demerger, which wasn't necessarily part of the course, but was something that I was particularly sort of interested in. And also I have to reference, there's a couple of slides in here that I sort of, borrowed from the notes, but they are sort of, concepts that are fairly common on the internet anyway. So that's the thanks for Macquarie. The history, if we go through, so I'm going to break it into sort of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 parts, including the questions at the end there. So I'm going to go through a bit of history about the demerger, and then I'll go through these concepts of parenting advantage, the curse of capital allocation, and this particular one at the bottom, the utilities guide to a brown to green transition. And there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, but look, if you've got any burning questions that you want to ask, just ask them. It's sort of that sort of crowd. I think we can interrupt the flow of things, and it won't worry me too much at all if you've got any burning questions as we go along. Without any further ado, the history of it all. So, E.ON, does anyone know who E.ON is? In E.ON, so we've got a couple of people. What sort of crowd have we got in tonight? Have we got mostly engineers, or have we got, put your hands up, engineers? Yeah. Any finance people? One finance, welcome sir. Any strategy people? Brilliant. The one group that we needed to come along tonight is the one group that will get most value out of this presentation, and none of them have showed up. So that's all right. That's how things go. There will be some. What's your name, mate? Shanta. What sort of finance stuff do you do, mate? What's your
controls, law.
Who do you work for?
Large energy services.
Oh right, which one? Go on.
I wouldn't say that, no, but possible.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm not just interested because that's actually you probably of all people will get a lot out of this because this is sort of you're my target audience. Because it's E.ON was a big, large utility. It's a fossil fuel utility, and it's looking at this brown to green transition and how you do it from the point of view specifically. The subject I was studying was managing shareholder value. How you make this transition and bring shareholders along and minimise the impact on them as you make this transition from a value point of view. First things first is the history of what's happened to date. So there has been in Europe, not in Australia, well there was for a short period there, some carbon regulation. And Europe has had an ETS and the price of carbon has fluctuated up and down a bit, but they have had hanging over them, E.ON, operating in the European market, they've had issues to do with carbon regulation to deal with. And that ETS price has gone up and down depending on policy and politics and so on. And there's issues to do with the market got flooded at one point with cheap credits as the GFC happened. But that has been a regulatory constraint that E.ON has been operating in. And it's important to talk about as well. I'll bring this little disclaimer in at the start. I'm going to talk about E.ON and I'm really trying to capture what happened at E.ON because there's lessons that can be learned in terms of this transition in other areas like Australia, like North America, etc. But every market is different. They're all going to have their own little nuances, their own little regulatory constraints and problems that are going to be very unique to their circumstances. Australia's got a unique regulatory environment, as is US and North America. So you want to look at this talk in terms of an overall theme, but there will always be little nuances that affect specific markets and specific utilities in those markets. So we've had some carbon regulation there. The next thing that happened over the period, and I'm going to show you the graph in a minute, was we had Fukushima happened in 2011, and so everything that E.ON had done up to that point, they sort of were travelling along nicely, and they had this nuclear fleet. People didn't like it, but they sort of tolerated. And when Fukushima happened, there was a real, if you like, global move to sort of get nuclear out. And whether people, can go into the pub and argue about whether it's good because it's zero emissions and all the rest of it, you can sort that out at the pub later. But that was a regulatory constraint that has been, almost suddenly imposed, and as a result of that, the German government and the European governments haven't shut them down immediately, but they've given them a time frame to 2022 when they need to have closed those things down. And that doesn't look like it's moving. They've sort of held their fingers, they might get it extended, but that doesn't look like it's going to change. There've also been other regulatory impacts as well, and we know all of this stuff. You guys read Renew Economy and follow what's happening over here. All sorts of other very interesting regulatory pressures to do with feed-in tariffs, reverse auctions, all those sorts of things, and renewables policy. And specifically the one that impacted E.ON most significantly was the issues to do with the fact that you've got a zero marginal cost supply when it comes to wind and solar and those sorts of things, and that was not something that was that easy to incorporate into a corporate strategy when you all of a sudden are used to having these commodity costs, and then you've got one of your assets that once it's built, it has this zero marginal cost and can displace your other fossil fuel assets. But that's right. That's right. But this is if you're looking at this from a corporate strategy point of view, these are some of the factors you've got.
No, the shame for me.
Yes.
The corporation.
Yeah.
Thought that it was difficult to deal with.
Yes.
The wind and the sun not costing anything.
Yes. Well, it's. We'll come to that's a good point, and we'll come to that later.
Really quite ridiculous.
It is. But you'll see what I'm trying to do is take what you've said there and actually incorporate it into their spreadsheets and see the issues to why that is, because that has implications for how the system develops going forward. So that's.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a negative for the rent seekers.
Indeed. Now, this point here, I'll put this in bold for a reason, you see, and that there, if you walk away with nothing else from tonight, Get your phone out, mate. Take a photo of that. That's the one you want right there, right? That's it's the divergence of centralised and distributed energy markets, and E.ON and a number of large utilities had the view early on that as you were just supplying customers with electrons, and you could just take one lot out and put one lot in, and it would kind of work out from a shareholder point of view as you swapped those customers over. And that there, and the corporate strategy that underpins how you manage that problem, if you know the answer, write it down, because every global utility wants to know what to do about that problem. And it's a lot of it's tied in with the idea around asset cannibalisation, as you, and we'll expand on this going forward, but the fact that you have one set of assets that as you invest in wind and solar, you devalue your base load. And if you were to keep investing in base load, you would devalue solar. And so whatever you do, whatever investment you make, devalues your other customer bases. So I'll move on. So this is, does anyone know what that is? That is the share price. That is the share price of E.ON in 2007. The story starts there. If you can see right up the top there, you had nice, happy shareholders, okay? Good, stable dividends, nice regulated utility, good monopoly sort of assets. And does anybody know what that says in German?
Lucky.
No. This is happy.
Happy.
Happy. Does anyone have any idea what this word here says in German? I typed it into Google Translate. It says pissed off. I put that into Google Translate, and that's what it says. And that is what's happened over that period. I mentioned all of those things, and we're going to start to try and make a vague attempt at unpicking some of the corporate strategy stuff that happened between there and there that caused the Germans to be a bit pissed off. It's important whenever you're doing these comparisons or analysis on any sort of share prices or share charts, is that you should really look at it and compare it to the index. There might be some explanation as to why, maybe it's a cyclical company that, there might have been very low iron ore prices or commodity prices in some examples that might explain what's going on here, that allow you to unpick it from the strategy of the company. So that can be an explanation. And so what you would see, which I haven't put on here, is because we all remember what happened here, GFC happened. So, you can explain this bit of it, demand dropped, industry dried up, it was a big problem. The difference is that the rest of the world indexes, they all picked up again. And E.ON just kept sliding down. So that tells you that there's a corporate strategy sort of element in play. So that's what's going on there. Now, some of you might at this point go, Matt, well, is this unique to E.ON? What happened not only in terms of the sector, and you can look and go, well, who was the head of strategy at the time? Maybe his name was Hans or something like that, and he had a problem with drink. Who knows what could have caused this to happen? So you do need, as I said, to look not only at the big picture, but also, more importantly, which is what this one shows, what happened to the industry. And so here is a very, fair comparable of E.ON, which is RWE, which is the other large European utility, and you see almost together both of those slid down. So it's not just something that is specific to E.ON, it's something that is across the industry. So that's what's going on there. Well,
when you say industry, you mean the whole of the electrical distribution and
the whole of the electrical industry.
That's coal, that's all.
That is European utilities. So we're comparing a like European utility with another like European utility. I could come to this a bit later, but if you look at what's happened in North America, a similar thing happened with NRG. Have people heard of NRG? David Crane? So he had a really red-hot go at trying to turn quite a dirty US sort of fossil fuel utility and tried to turn it around, and I haven't got their share price, but it's going to look something like this. So this is the idea around how do we unpick this problem.
Matt,
Yes.
is the issue both always not that where you're dependent upon fossil fuels,
Yes.
you've actually got a barrier to entry to others competing in the market against you. Because there's that whole investment over many years
Yes.
being able to extract and distribute fossil fuels to your
Yes.
generators.
Yes.
If you've got free
Yes.
energy, you no longer have a barrier to entry to the energy source.
Yep. Yep. And that.
And
Yep.
from a money user's point of view, it doesn't matter how you do it, shares or loans, you're all of a sudden unprotected
Yep.
in the barrier to entry space
Yep.
of competitors.
Yep. Yep. And that's part of the big theme. Yeah.
And is that what this is reflecting?
So that's part of what this. We're going to come to. This is exactly you're dancing around the issue here, but it's one of the main themes of what's caused this is the fact that you can now, in a very modular way, dot your generation right next to where you want it. And you could never do that. It was never cost effective. We all know what's happened to the cost of solar over the last 5 to 10 years. It was just never economic. There was no way of making a little mini coal-fired power station of 5 kilowatts and dotting it on your roof. Had there been, then this market would have happened. It's about that.
Second, barrier to entry that's flat is distribution.
Yes. Yep. Yep. You fix both those problems as you can move from this centralised model to a distributed model. That's what's happened. Yeah. And so they lost. You can see there from the peak 2008. E.ON dropped 75 billion euros. So just to put some numbers on that was why the anger fresson on the last bit came in. They lost $75 billion between 2008 and when they finally demerged at the back end of 2016. So they lost 75% of their shareholders' money. So that's the important thing is to look at this and go, well, what happened at a strategy level here? Why did all this happen? And then what's the context for how you might deal with it in a strategy position? So this is what they look like before. This is, and I won't spend too much time on this, but this is straight out of their demerger book, and it is what E.ON used to look like and what they've done. This is explaining a bit of the history of the split up. So it had these two things, and effectively E.ON split off, and I'll show you this in a minute. All of the distributed, exciting, high growth renewable energy stuff went in with E.ON, and then the other low growth, centralised fossil fuel stuff went into this Uniper company, and it listed in about September of 2016. And I'll add to this, E.ON did keep some of the assets, so it still owns a little stake in Uniper, but it said it's going to liquidate that over time when the market conditions, because it's such a big stock, you don't want to flood the market all at once. But effectively, from an E.ON shareholder point of view, you still own both assets. You still own the distributed stuff and you still own the centralised stuff, but they're now enabled to position themselves and use separate corporate strategies. And the underpinning, so one of the underpinning concepts is how do you manage these two very different asset classes in these two very different markets using a single corporate strategy? Can it be done? You know, that's what we found out doesn't appear to be the case. Right? So that's what happened there. So in this here, so that's I just mentioned that the split. So you've got the E.ON group got carved off, and they spun out the Uniper group, and they delisted them and let them go off and do their own thing. There was one little interesting exception though, and that was to do with doesn't cover it here actually, but E.ON were forced to hold some of the nuclear assets in Germany. as part of a deal with regulators for this split, they were required to hold on to some of those nuclear assets because the German government wasn't convinced if you spun them off into another entity and then you had a big load of clean-up costs at the end that the German government wasn't going to have to pick the tab up for that one. So they were very, very cautious about saying we will approve this deal, but contingent upon you keeping hold of those assets and agreeing to manage them and clean up after them after 2022. Because as you all are, I'm sure, aware, nuclear has some high setup costs, but it also has some very high liability costs. And that is an interesting problem because while they fix, by keeping those nuclear assets, you can say they fix the climate change risk, they add nuclear risk to their portfolio, but they also add centralisation risk rather than decentralisation risk. So if you truly believe that the market is going to become very decentralised, those nuclear assets also become a liability. And so this corporate strategy that E.ON are going to undertake won't actually be allowed to fully take off and launch until after 2022, when all of those nuclear assets are retired and the cleanup cost is all done. Then they can focus on actually embracing this distributed strategy that they're undertaking.
Just a comment, they spun up hydropower. Why is that? Was that not seen as part of their renewables package?
So, good question that I don't have the answer for. It may well be, whenever you split these things up, there's generally never a perfect split. And it's likely to be something like, and I'm going to cover this a bit later on, but likely to be some good geographical location. But they may also have made a split and gone, well, look, it's clean, it's centralised, so it still fits into that centralised model. And if you really want to embrace decentralised, hydro doesn't work unless it's very small scale. So that's there is a strategic rationale for splitting off hydro, even though it might be arguably sort of cleaner. But there might also have been, well, it just makes more sense for it to go with these guys, just due to the way it operates, the types of engineers that it needs. It may have made sense. And geographically, maybe they wanted to retreat a bit more to Germany and cut the rest of Europe free, depending on where those hydro assets were.
It's also quite possible that they had to do some package deals.
Maybe.
They might have said to companies, if all right,
Yep.
we have to sweeten the deal for you.
That's right.
If you take this nuclear power plant off our hands,
Yeah.
to sweeten the deal, we'll throw in that hydropower.
Maybe.
That could well be.
Very, very likely. Because ultimately you're going to be pitching this to investors, and if investors think that they're not going to get any value and all they're getting is liability and no sort of cream on top of the cake, then they'll go, well, the demerger's not working.
Yeah.
It's not going to go ahead. So there's got to be enough value in it for both parties.
Wasn't it?
I'm not sure of the one steel situation.
Well,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
they went down, and
Yeah.
people were starting them off in South Australia, and
Yes.
totally broke.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what, 32 or something was
Yeah.
it?
Ah.
32. Yeah. So I think that was exactly that.
Mm.
They had to leave some cash flow and
Yeah. Sure.
assets in.
Yep, that happens a lot with demergers. Yeah, so you have to put some good assets in with the bad ones in order for someone to agree to take the bad ones.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no value in the deal.
It's the best way to operate any white elephant store.
Well, that's what they look like post merger, post demerger. I beg your pardon.
There seems to be another
Yes.
interesting asset that seems to cross the transmission assets. So the energy networks are all sitting with E.ON.
Yep.
But Uniper will need your transmission assets.
Sure.
E.ON are sitting with energy networks.
I didn't mention this at the start, but you brought it up. Is that there was at the start of 2008 some other things here as well going on. That I think it was 2007, 2008. They were quite vertically integrated, and as part of a sort of like governments like to do from time to break up some of these monopolies to create more competition in the market. So there was also, even just prior to the big collapse in price, there was also we want to split some of these assets off and try and have a model that I don't want to be careful that I don't, because I don't know that much about the regulatory situation in Europe, that they were trying to sort of do similar things in Australia where you're not allowed to own both the poles and wires and the generation assets. So that's my loose reading of it. But that was very much, we sort of studied the demerger and the strategy, and not necessarily a lot of those, regulatory intricacies that you mentioned there. But it's a good point. It's a very good point. So I'm going to talk about, I mentioned parenting advantage. Does anyone know what parenting advantage is? Got one person in finance. You know what parenting advantage is? There's a few. So basically what it is, it's this idea around the fact that you have a portfolio that adds value to the assets in that portfolio. And there's a number of examples of conglomerates around the world. Wesfarmers here in Australia, so they own everything from sort of copper mines and pokies to shopping centres, Coles and so on. So they own a large portfolio, and as a result of those very diverse cash flows, they can get lower costs of capital. They get the benefit of that diversification, the portfolio effect. They can get a little bit of vertical integration, and they can also, benefit from the scale of their operation. So that's one. And which the cost of capital stuff. This is boring finance stuff that we can talk about in the pub afterwards. But basically, it allows them to borrow to be a bit more debt heavy because they've got these diverse cash flows that can manage debt, and that then reduces the discount rate, if you like, that their cash flows are applied to. That's a bit dull for you guys. And the other reasons too, a parenting advantage, if you put a layer over the top based on what you sort of mentioned before, you might have very good geographical locations why you're a good parent. If it's something in your sort of geography, for example, you also want to look at, in terms of parenting advantage, the age of particular assets. If you're particularly good at managing assets that are very young, or particularly good at managing assets that are very old, that may also represent some sort of, cost advantage that the assets have under your ownerships. But basically, the gist of parenting advantage, and there's whole books written on this, by the way. So, as I said, go and do the Macquarie course if you're interested in it. But the idea around parenting advantage is that are you the highest valuating owner of this asset? And so the utilities, in the example of E.ON and Uniper, is that one of the reasons that the split occurred is that because you couldn't manage these two assets that were cannibalising each other as a result of investment in one takes away value from the other, you couldn't be a good parent to both sets of assets in a world where you have both a centralised market and a diverging distributed market. It just wasn't really possible anymore for you to be able to do that. And that was, once again, I'm talking about main lessons learned here. It's not possible for you to do that in a corporate strategy sense and have a single corporate strategy that is a responsible parent to both those assets in those diverging markets. And just little examples. So at certain times, I'm sure this is public knowledge now, but Wesfarmers were looking to spin off Officeworks. I don't know if anyone's read that or heard about that. So that's an example of, it's got enough scale now, it's doing its own thing, it doesn't add value in the portfolio. So when it's now got enough scale, we'll IPO it, set it off, cut it free, and actually get that value back for our shareholders. We no longer add value anymore. And so if you've got an asset that's sort of operating at a discount under your ownership, you spin it off and get the cash and give it back to your shareholders. So and it comes down to, going forward, is with your team of people, your team of your engineers and management, with your team of corporate strategy people, should you be owning this asset, or can someone else in the market do a better job than you can? So I think I've covered most of that stuff off.
Matt, does
Yes.
it come down to that effectively, as soon as this regulatory social change occurred, it's sort of social change as well, through super funds, investment through super pensions, that the fossil fuel industry actually almost was much more akin to a lease asset that had a neutral or nothing value with its in, as opposed to a capital investment. much more analogous that way. That look, it's like a leased car. That
Yeah.
At the end of the lease, it's worth.
I'd argue a car at the end of its lease is worth more than a Hazelwood that you have to clean up.
Well, that's
So-
because you've got,
So that's
you've got a liability.
yeah. So
But
so
at
it's,
the end, it's
yeah.
almost like a lease type situation rather than a capital situation.
Yeah. Look, you can look at those values and their breakup values, but you'd have to look at that on a sort of probably asset by asset base.
Sophisticated
Yeah,
analysis.
yeah. So, but if you think of all of these little companies as being made up of just lots of little wind farms, lots of little coal plants, all of these things, they're all these asset bases, and it's like individually, do I add value to this wind farm, to this one, to this coal, to this gas, under the portfolio and strategy that I've got? And that's this is one of the things that caused, Eon to need to split away. So, the two things. So I'll go through this. This is another one that's very, very difficult. So the parenting advantage is you've got a single corporate strategy, and you're trying to manage these assets with your single corporate strategy, and you've got two sets that are not just different, but getting more different faster. I don't know if that's good English or not, but that's what's happening. They're getting more unwieldy to manage by the day. As solar comes down in price and the liabilities of keeping and maintaining coal go up and the risk of carbon regulation goes up, these assets get much more difficult. One is when you invest in, and you can look at all of the PPAs and things being signed for large-scale solar. One is a very, very high-growth area. Look at Tesla's share price. Look at all of these inverter companies that are all, by and large, high-growth stocks, not spitting off a lot of dividends, but they're growing. And then you've got this other asset base that is just declining and going down in value over time. As it approaches the end of its sort of useful life, the investment that you need to keep them going goes up and up and up, and eventually you reach a tipping point where it's not worth investing anymore in those things and you have to retire them. The other thing about parenting advantage, looking at that corporate strategy overlay, is you have two very different types of assets in them. One is a very technology focused software, battery management, grid integration. The other is infrastructure, people running large thermal coal plants. And the skills that you need at a corporate strategy level between the engineers we've got here, the engineers that run thermal coal plants and the engineers that do software management in a battery are completely different skill sets. Different planets. And you can't just cut one guy, he's an engineer, he can do battery systems management. You can't. It's so specialised, and it's getting, once again, increasingly specialised. So you can't manage with a single corporate strategy to be good at both of those. You've kind of got to pick one. And that's why startups can come in and peel these layers off and take these niches away and attack the cash flows of the incumbents. I've mentioned there before, distributed versus centralised. You're all people who follow and understand that, but you have two different asset bases there, two different strategies. One is growing and the other is shrinking, and those are two very distinct markets. I mentioned there the software skills versus the infrastructure skills. This is an interesting one. How do you brand yourself as being clean, green, and into distributed solar at the same time as you're also running all of the coal plants? It's not possible at a strategy level for you to go out to the community and have a consistent branding out there that says we're about doing things differently when you're holding on to all of these coal assets as well.
So, AGL would say it's very possible.
Well,
Greenwash.
we'll see. We'll see if it's possible. And so, look, if you spend a lot of money on it, you might get away with it. Like, you can convince some of the people, but it's yes or no. Yep.
With those points you brought there, what happens when you get the interference from the parliamentary parent, the grandparent? What's the end game of their interaction in this situation that we're starting to see a lot of activity from there?
I'm going to come back to the politics. I'm going to try and keep it politics free as best I can. It's not possible to do, but I'm going to try to keep that. But I'm going to, when we come to capital allocation again, ask me that question again, and I'll, yes?
The gentleman here has jumped the gun. Should I sell my AGL shares?
I think.
Coming here is making me quite nervous.
Well, have we got any other AGL shareholders? Have we got shareholders? Yeah, so you got one there. Yeah. So I don't like to give equity advice at BZE discussion groups as a general rule. So especially not stuff that's going on the internet. You'll see that there. It's going to be on the internet. So I'll come back to that. But it's a good question. It's a good question. Is to are these? Do you think these companies are? What was your name? Neil. Neil, I'll bring you. I'll reference you a few times throughout this. That's right. You're an engineer, aren't you?
No, I'm just an ordinary citizen.
Ordinary citizen.
Who worked for AGL a long time ago.
Right. Well, maybe you.
Can you finish that statement for me? Do you think these companies are?
So I've forgotten what I was going to say. Do I think they're a good parent? So do I think that the corporate strategy that these people are putting in place is going to line them up for success in a world where the centralised assets and the distributed market move apart? What do those first two graphs show you that I showed you? What do those two share prices show you?
Well, they
That's
lost
right. $75 billion they lost. So I'll answer that at the end. I don't want to put people off, but we're going to cover that exact problem. Is do you hold these shares or don't you? Okay. And from a corporate strategy position, are they well positioned to succeed and grow your value going forward, or are they not well positioned? Would be a good question. And
orally.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So segment specialisation is an interesting one because you've got these two sets of assets, and when you spin them off, what you do is you allow them to target their specific niche more effectively. And so you might have had, and I'm going to use the example of Eon, is it might have gone after a high-cost niche market of distributed people offering very specialised solutions to those customers. It can now target that very niche group. Uniper might say, look, we're just going to be boring and slow, and we're just going to be very low cost in our big centralised market, or we're going to be very low cost and we're going to chase that market. Whereas when the assets are tied together, what are we doing? Are we low cost or are we high cost? I don't know. And so it's not possible for you to be both high cost and low cost. It's just all over the place. And the corporate strategy people and the marketing people are tearing their hair out there. So you really want to look at this point here is what is your competitive advantage in that segment? And by splitting the assets off and giving everyone their own corporate strategy, you allow them to say, I'm going to be high cost niche in this high growth distributed market, and the other guys, for the other shareholders, the same group of shareholders, I'm going to be very low cost in this centralised market that I know is declining, but I know that I'm going to be the last one standing because I'm the lowest cost as the others all disappear. So,
and that's a fairly major point in your business plan, isn't it?
Absolutely critical. Are you a high cost or a low cost producer? Where do you sit on that? Where do you sit on that competitive analysis scale? So that's right. So that's the parenting advantage stuff. But as I said, books written on it. There's heaps of books written on it, and this is part of this this what we call Ashridge. Welcome, mate. How are you? And I sort of did. It looks at this concept of the potential for parenting advantage. And I sort of mocked that up. You can find that on the internet, that Ashridge model. It's very sort of common, but it talks about the potential for parenting advantage. If your market isn't being disrupted like this one is, and you are a Wesfarmers or a Walmart and you've got a distribution business, it's no trouble to add on, some Officeworks trucks to the back of your Coles and use the same facilities. So there's good potential for parenting advantage in some industries. But if one part of your business is cannibalising the revenue from the other, the potential for that parenting advantage is greatly reduced. And that is why those two assets, and you can think of these assets as within those two companies, there's lots of little assets dotted around. You know, they're split apart, so there's wind farms up there, and so those, even though I've split them off, if you think of them in terms of their individual assets, they're probably dotted all around there. And you really want to be in that heartland area. So we've got startup people in? Anyone in startups? One person, yeah, what sort of startup are you in?
Well, we're going to do solar.
Good. Yeah, so you're going to start, you're risky because you're small and you don't have much cash, but you're going to start targeting your niche right in that very top corner. You're going to be in your heartland going out for your specific customers that are going to love you, and you're going to operate right up there. As you get bigger and you get more diverse and you acquire things, suddenly some of those assets don't fit anymore. I hope you get to that scale soon. That's what you want, what's going on there. And then eventually, they don't just move from not being in that real niche target where it's high growth, they move to the edge of that heartland, and once you get below this point, they actually become destructive to your business, and you move into this sort of alien territory. I equally could have swapped those two around depending on whether I thought I wanted to be a low growth, centralised, or a high, like I've written this, has been written from the point of view of Eon. So that's Eon, how Eon would view the world. Uniper would view it the other way around. They would swap those assets around. So that's what happened, and you know the value trap, as I mentioned, that's the 75 billion euros that happened. And the important point was that for a while there, and you think 7 years, 2007 or 2008 it started, they didn't demerge till they announced in 2014. This split here, the forces that are pulling those two apart is multiplying up dramatically. It's not just, now it looks like that, but it's actually, they're both going even further apart over time as batteries come online, solar gets cheaper, etc. And the other thing to mention is that this corporate strategy stuff is under constant evolution. You don't stop, it's not static, it's constantly evolving and moving as those assets and the competitive advantage that moves around.
Now,
yes.
but it wasn't.
That's right.
And this is the whole thing about
Yep.
this. This is the basis of what you're talking about.
Yep.
Because 30 years ago, or even less,
Mm-hmm.
when everyone was just, producing electricity
Mhm.
from fossil fuels,
Yep.
and that's all there was, it was an extraordinarily static industry.
Very.
And it almost needed no corporate strategy because there was nothing to do.
Yep.
But now there is.
Now there is. Whatever little benefit that you have highlighted there, that hasn't just been, it's like that's been a sort of an electric shock to them. And a lot of those strategy people that have used to operating in a nice, stable, monopoly regulated environment, their pants are on fire now because it's not like that anymore. All these guys are coming in trying to disrupt them, and as soon as you can move large amounts of energy around a grid in electric vehicles, that's not the world that you're talking about there. It's a very, very different...
Someone unleashed an Uber on them.
That's right, someone unleashed an Uber. But it's happened in other industries, Kodak, you name them, Blockbuster. So Blockbuster Video, do you remember them?
What you point out, though, is that it's not necessarily other people who are uprooting. They were uprooting themselves.
It's Walls.
That's what they were doing.
Mm.
And this is the reason why the whole demerger took
So
place.
it's the market. Oh, you're cutting to my grand conclusion here, and that's you're right. But we think this will be the summing up bit at the end, which you're going to get a preview from here. Is that we think of this as being technology driven. It's a technology driven disruption, but what's multiplying it all out, if you want to, this is another one to write down here, mate, take your photo here, right, is that it's actually going to get driven by capitalism. The shareholders are now on your side. They're now getting it, because it no longer makes sense anymore for you to stick in these big monopolies and do things the way they've been done. The shareholders will pick the ball up and run with it, and particularly with parenting advantage, if you are not the highest value adding owner of your asset and they think they can get better value by ripping you apart, they will tear you apart. And that's exactly what happened in this graph here, and this is pretty consistent, when they listed, the combined value for both Eon and Uniper, from an Eon shareholder point of view, you wake up in the morning and you've now got 2 lots of shares that have just listed, you've made $2 billion. Now, you haven't made your 75 back, but you've made more than it was under the one entity. So effectively what you had was these assets all being managed, and they weren't just it wasn't just parenting advantage, it was parenting disadvantage. You know, it was the assets by the market were had a discount applied to them because the people running Eon were doing such a terrible job with them that the market went, no, you're doing such a bad job, if you just need to split these apart. It's better that you don't own them anymore. What one set of management doesn't own them anymore. And that is in spite of, so we've created value there, and for people in finance, you would have had IPO costs, renegotiating debt covenants. The costs of splitting these apart would not have been cheap. I haven't got an exact number on it, but $1 billion, probably not, but would have been a lot of money and a lot of upheaval and separating and getting leases to separate the two companies and do all the rest of it. Even despite all of those IPO costs, they still made $2 billion. So that shows you the discount that was being applied to the assets under the single corporate strategy. So, everyone happy with that? Any questions? Yeah?
From that graph, I mean, Eon lost about $3 billion and Uniper came in at 3.5, so it's zero sum game.
No, it was actually, I had a look at it. It's actually, I don't know if the graph shows it, that's about 4, and that one lost about 2.5. But the problem is, it's a good point, this. You can't really, on the day of listing, there's all sorts of volatility going on. You really have to, for us to really properly assess how this corporate strategy is going to work, you've got to look at these over time, let the corporate strategies bake in and see, does it actually create value or not. It's looking at this, I covered that for a month there, and the thing that allowed me to draw that magic 2 billion number was it also what the share price jumped when they made the announcement they were going to demerger. So there was a fairly consistent picture from the announcement of the demerger to when it was going ahead, and every time it announced it, and said, yep, we're definitely going ahead with this, it bumped up. So it was the shareholders were saying, we think it's worth more split up than it is together.
Was this demerger successful?
Well, from a shareholder, you can say it was. If you just created $2 billion of value, but the ultimate truth is what the future holds. So it's hard to judge, and I haven't updated it from then. That's when I did the assignment here, and I handed it in about there, I think. So I don't know.
Well, if they didn't demerge, then the blue line might have come down.
That's right. Could have. Yep.
So Matt, the only question is, did your professor sell his AGL shares?
Well, we haven't. All we've done is Europe so far. So we haven't done anything yet. So
he can calculate the price.
So maybe. But this is now, we touched on, someone brought up this issue to do with capital. So capital allocation was the second bit, and I called this in the article. How are we off for time there, what?
I've got
Half an hour, okay. See, I've waffled a bit. On the parenting advantage. Capital allocation. So here's the problem. You're the CFO of your retailer, right? And you have got 3 places you can send money. Okay, you've got these assets. They're spinning off money. People are paying money for electricity. Some people would argue too much, but anyway, that's New South Wales people. And you've got 3 places you can send them. You can send them to your centralised, low growth, inflexible, higher emissions, less modular assets, which is, think of them like your Uniper, or you can invest them in your decentralised, high growth, more flexible, less emissions intensive, more modular assets, your distributed solar and so on, or you can give them back to your shareholders. So they're your 3 choices, okay, that you've got. And you've got to do that. And you know, because you're in the one sort of market here, every dollar that you spend in this decentralised bit eats the revenue from your top bit. That's the problem. So corporate strategy level, you're sitting here going, how do I create value for shareholders? I'll give them this, and I'll decrease the revenues there, I'll give them this, and I'll decrease the revenues. What are you going to do? Yes?
And aren't the competitive forces going to do the same thing if other companies are going to come and take your profit away? So, you're not in a vacuum there.
Nah, that's good. We're going to come to game theory in a minute, which is exactly what you brought up. It's game theory. You're not in a vacuum. Yep. So you're having to allocate capital in not just amongst your assets, but amongst your competitive landscape. And so how do you do that efficiently? And that's a key point. Capital allocation. I want to talk a little bit about the conflicts. Have we got half an hour till questions or half an hour total? Wow.
25 minutes.
I really
No questions at the pub.
We can do the questions at the pub as well. We can do the questions at the pub. So capital allocation, conflict trade. You're sitting there, single corporate strategy. Where do you put your best managers? Do you put them in your high growth bit, or do you put them in your low growth bit? What do you do? Either way, they're going to eat the revenue from the other guy. So how do you manage that? That's a problem. Your shareholders want a dividend. They always do, don't they? They always want dividend shareholders. But if you give them one, you miss out on investing in some of these high growth renewables opportunities. What do you do? And this is the other one that apparently I did do some internet research on this one when I was doing it. This one here was apparently a nightmare. You reward the distributed, like within any corporate, for people who have been large corporates, you need to reward your good managers by doing good work, and you offer them options and share prices. And you say, if you achieve this KPI, then you will get some shares. Or if you say to the company, look, if the share price grows by 10%, then we'll all get a bit, we'll share that with the company. You had people in the high growth, German renewable energy industry that were growing their business unit at 20 to 25%, achieving all their KPIs. And in doing that, what they did is they decreased their share price.
Because it's spread across the whole company.
Because it's spread across the whole company. Yeah. So you can't adequately reward the people that are doing a great job internally, because as the better job they do, the more your share price goes down. And so you can imagine for those people, they would say, well, I think I'll just go and set up a startup. I'm just going to get out of here. I'm going to go over there, and I'm not going to worry about any of this. I don't want the legacy of having to deal with these centralised assets. I want to just grow my market. I know how to do that. I got good at doing that, and I just want to go and do that. And I don't want my performance to be impacted by a falling share price. So that was one of the key things. And you can imagine then at a management level the conflicts that brought in. You're sitting there. You've only got a certain amount of money to invest. The fights that would have broken out between the business units on who gets access to the capital. It would have been horrendous. Look, we're growing at 20% a year, but you can't. So you're sitting there, you've got the business case, it's all rolled out, we're going to grow at 25% a year, and they say, no, we're going to give it to these guys. And you would have just, torn your hair out. So that's why, you can look at this from a transition point of view, but it really does help to reflect on what are the corporates doing in here? How do they manage this problem? Because they're ultimately the ones that are going to be building the assets and building the new asset base. How do they manage that problem? This is what we call a competitive life cycle analysis. And people in startups, you are right up that end there. So you're in high innovation, you're not probably returning a lot of money to shareholders, you're innovating like crazy to try and get up there, and then eventually, as things become sort of more normal, like you think like Uber you mentioned before, it moves first and gets a bit of an advantage, and then Lyft comes along and everyone copies it, and it scales from there. But eventually this stuff starts to fail, and these reinvestment rates, it stops being worth reinvesting, and you start not getting your cost of capital back anymore, and the benefits of being in that, you're basically in different life cycles. And that comes back to that earlier point I raised about parenting advantages. What of your asset base, what life cycle are you in? Where are you at? Are you at the start? Are you at the end? And the corporate strategy for dealing with things at the start is very different to the one at the end. So that's that. because you are, and that simply highlights also how difficult it is to invest in a market that's being disrupted. It's really, really tricky to be able to make money in a market that's being disrupted when you hold both the assets. It's not really possible. And what E.ON did, this is the whole strategy behind it. E.ON split these two off, and they said, you just get really good at milking this cow until it dies. You know, we don't want you get really good, have a strategy that allows you to just spare the minimum amount of cash that you need, you split the rest off to shareholders, and you get really good at that stuff, and these guys will get really good at software innovation. And so by doing that, split the asset bases off and allow everyone to pursue a single corporate strategy. Now, this here explains a lot. I could do 20 minutes on this, but I won't, Miwa, don't worry. Right? So this here is an example of a very, very simplistic coal-fired power station. Have I got that about right? Little bit of planning, big capex, and you'll notice there, lovely, standardised, identical cash flows for 25 years. Commodity price doesn't change, nothing. There's no regulatory risk. It's all just nice and simple, and then a bit of a clean-up cost at the end. Okay, that's not real. Okay, that's not real. You'll have all sorts of investments you'll need to make to upgrade the plants, commodity cycle risk, pricing risk. I've just tried to express that. But that there explains why it's very difficult. People wanting to get a new coal-fired power plant up at the moment, that's what it's up against. You are taking a bet, you're forcing the CFO who's allocating the capital, you're forcing him to make a bet on this market for the next 25 years. And that just won't do it. It's not logical for them to do it. If they own it, if they're already here, it makes sense for them to keep going. But if you want them to invest new capital, you're asking them to take a bet on the solar market. 4 years for a coal-fired power station, would you get one up in then? 5, 6 maybe? What's the price of solar and batteries going to be there?
Take you 4 years to plan it.
There's a real chance that this cash flow positive stuff may not even be that hot. Like it might be zero. Given the competitive nature of the fact you then have to distribute it and all of those other things, you could well find that coal generation is stranded before the paint dries on it.
And by the time you get to there, you may also have to capture your own carbon.
And that's right. And so you've got all of those other risks there. And so that's why, if we could all talk at dinner parties about this, because everyone says we want a new coal-fired generator, no one is going to invest in it because of that.
They have done that in fairly recent time, though, haven't they? They've built some new brown coal generators and only came online about 2012.
Have they? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
where was that?
Neufren or something like that at school.
No.
What country?
Germany.
Germany.
Yep.
Is it Germany or Poland?
I don't know.
Germany.
So Germany. Okay, hold on. No, that's a really good point. Right. Okay. So this is nothing to do with it. We're off topic here. So this is E.ON, but that's a very good point. Okay. And you don't realise what a good point it is, right?
You saw what I Googled the day before yesterday.
No. Good. Here's the thing. Can we run over a bit, Miwa? Because that's a good point, right? What year did it come online?
Not of mine, no.
No. What year did it come online? 2011, 2012?
2012.
Yeah. So when do you think its planning happened?
Oh, well before that.
In 2000, 1990 maybe?
Reckon it was before here?
Got to be.
Yeah. 5 years.
There you go. So they weren't in that world then. They made the investment when they thought it was all normal. They made the investment in that coal-fired power plant that you were talking about.
This is brown coal.
Brown coal. They made that investment when they thought they still had a centralised market.
And if you overlay the solar costs.
And if you overlay the solar costs coming down, doesn't bear thinking about. And that's why it all collapsed down in price. So
in trouble now? Or?
They're in trouble because they've now got that asset, they've built it, they need to pay it off. And the shareholders thought that in 2008 that they were going to get their money back. They invested all in it and they thought it was going to get money back. And it turns out by this year when they realise it and it comes online, they're not going to get their money back. Look, this is going to get disrupted. It's all being disrupted by very flexible wind and solar that's lower cost than the coal. And sorry, yeah.
And Matt, what do you think explains the fact that the coal lobby say that there are coal-fired power stations being built around the world
Yes.
today?
Yes.
New ones.
Yes.
How on earth are they justifying that?
Because of the same,
Sorry.
because of the same reason. Those coal-fired plants were planned perhaps prior to 2007 or something or other like that, and that's the reason why they are being built, for the same reason.
We are way off topic here, right? We are way off topic here. The pub will not forgive us if we go too far down this rabbit hole, okay? They need the business, the pub, right? But here's the thing. So there is that argument there. I would argue, I don't know what's happening in the rest of the world. I'd tell you right here in Australia that these laws of physics apply. Those laws of physics apply. And if you imagine nuclear, people talk about nuclear. We want nuclear as well. Starts about here. These lines have this error bar on them, you see. And they could be anywhere from there to there. And we're not sure. And then you get those cash flows. And then you get that.
That then want to be poking through the floor.
That's right. That's right. And so the question is, how do you make this stack up? How do you stack it up? And it probably doesn't. And when you look at, when you have wind has got the issue, it's got this big capex cost, all those things, but then you can kind of be pretty sure you don't have any regulatory risk. You can be sure going forward that you will get those cash flows, and so you can more easily make that investment. So back to E.ON and Uniper, okay? The strategy, what the strategy of demerging them allowed them to do was for them to split off and have their own individual capital allocation processes. So when the CFO of one company did not have to worry any longer about what was happening and what they were doing was going to affect the other company's cash flows. They could split those assets apart, and the strategy of doing that meant that everybody could get up in the morning and know, I am chasing the distributed energy market. I have nothing else to focus on, nothing else to worry about. I'm going to go after it with certainty. And that's one of the rationales that the corporate strategy enabled. Fixes the trade-offs, fixes the conflicts, all of those things we mentioned before about how you manage staff who are performing really well but driving your share price down. It fixes all those problems, right? You can just imagine the fights internally and the disruption to a business when you've got that sort of stuff going on. So then I want to talk about very quickly, this is the key bit here, okay, so the transition. And so it's about, I talk about maximising shareholder value. The evidence that I garnered throughout that research, addressing your topic there, sir, is it's actually about minimising shareholder loss. Okay? People don't want to hear that. Okay? You can take a picture of that, mate, if you like. Okay? Because really, it's good stuff there, right? So it's about minimising loss. The idea that you are going to create value, staying together. Because I'm sure there'll be some of you, you know, I'm one of these people, you look up, you think, looking at a sort of pane of glass on a wall on a wet day, you're looking up, you see a flag at the top, and you think, I reckon I can climb that. Some people like a challenge, but the lesson from history, from what's happened with RWE and with E.ON and with NRG, is that despite the best of intentions and the best of will, it's not really, there's been no evidence yet that anyone has been able to successfully do it. Okay? That's you're addressing your point there indirectly, sir. Of course, not to say AGL couldn't do it. Okay? But that's the evidence is not there that you can, right? And they've done some interesting stuff actually with how they've split those assets off. If we've got any AGL people in, you know, they've sort of tried to do what I've recommended in the last couple of slides. But there's still some issues about how that can be done. So, firstly, deficiencies in analytical techniques, which is basically bad modelling. So, in theory, you could say, we've got these centralised assets, we've got these distributed assets, we know that they're going to cannibalise the revenues from the other one, but we're going to accept it because the benefit of us staying together, it still means that we can, that the benefit of us staying together outweighs the cannibalisation. If you were, for example, to be the best, lowest cost producer and the best high cost, the best sort of niche distributor, you might be able to make the maths work out. You might be able to, okay? But your modelling would have to be pretty good, and you'd have to be pretty sure that you could do that.
Isn't there the occasional company, though, that doesn't see it from that point of view and instead sees it as a transition? They see the centralised model as a model that's not going to last.
Yep.
And if they don't do something about
Yep.
moving to the decentralised model,
Yep.
they're going to kill their own revenue stream
That's
and drive
right.
themselves out of
They will.
business.
They will.
So isn't there companies that look at it from that point of view?
There are, but none of them have been able to unpick the maths to actually do it properly. Like there just hasn't been. If anyone wants to give me good examples, I don't know if we've got people who've got experience working with AGL or these other. I don't know how, and I'm just a student. I have to hold my hand up and say, look, I just study this academically. I'm sure that once you're inside these organisations, you get a whole other layer of complexity in terms of how this practically could be done.
But that in the Australian market, the European market, most places, you always have the interest of government-held generation assets.
Yes.
Distribution.
Yep.
And they have as opposed to if you just had investment shareholders like pension funds, funds, the government ones have that further dynamic layer.
Regardless of if your government owns you or if you're owned by shareholders, you kind of still want to be a high valuating owner of the asset. So you still kind of have an interest in getting as much revenue as you can from the asset, whether that be on behalf of your shareholders or for your taxpayers. You still want to have this approach of trying to be a valuating owner. It's a complex question. As soon as we start bringing in government ownership to this market, that just really muddies the waters.
Because those places like Arizona, if you think about it, it's a lot of the municipal pension funds.
Yep.
And that's why they're erecting enormous barriers to entrance to solar.
Sure, to try and protect the revenues. Yeah. So I'll move on to this stuff. So lack of a dynamic structure, emergence rather than design. That's another really key point, is that had Eon and RWE and these other guys said, we are going to design, we know that we're going to lose shareholder value, but we are going to deliberately plan and design that we're only going to lose the minimum amount, they may well have had a better outcome that wasn't 75 billion euro. But they sort of, they let it emerge rather than plan for it. And it's very difficult when your costs of solar are coming down and you've got all of these other issues, but that key around emergence rather than design is a key one. Technology versus infrastructure. This is another point. Technology life cycles, and if you go back to that picture that I showed you there, are much, much shorter, and they're getting much shorter. The Apple builds a store, comes out, cannibalises, for 2 years it sells the iPhone 4, and then it stops selling it, and then sells the iPhone 5. These cycles are getting shorter and shorter. And so, and even to do with solar, that picture I showed you with the bars coming down and the little static stuff going across here, who wants to have a bet on what the cost of solar and batteries is going to be in 2025? Who wants to have a bet on that? The problem is, if you're the CFO of AGL, Energy Australia, you have to have a bet. You don't want to have a bet, but you do, because you've got to plan, you've got to allocate your capital, you're betting on a future market, and you've got to be able to A, supply your customers, and B, have a guess as to what the price of solar is going to be, price of wind is going to be, and where your current assets will sit at that point in the future. It's a problem.
It doesn't really matter so much, because once you've built it, it's basically producing power for free. So
that's right. Yeah.
The payback.
Yeah, but if you're looking to produce a new gas peaker or a new, something with a commodity, with a commodity cost. Even people don't realise that wind farms actually have a even though the commodity is free, they still have maintenance and gearbox changes, and so they actually have their own. But the thing for them is, which is really crucial, is it's pretty known. There's no risk in it. There's no commodity cycle. There's no carbon risk. It's like we know that, you know, it might cost us maybe $15 to $20 a megawatt hour in terms of maintenance cost. So it still undercuts marginal cost of coal, but it's known. It's not at risk of any government intervention or carbon
Even
pricing.
if it's slightly unknown, it's still nowhere near as volatile
That's
as
right.
commodity
Yep.
costs.
And so you can manage those cash flows more easily. And so the other thing is optionality going forward in terms of minimising this shareholder loss. Optionality is going to be much more highly prized. So the ability to be nimble with your assets is going to be much more highly prized as things get more volatile. And the forces multiplying this transition, the battery costs, etc., are likely to get higher and higher.
But you've got other forces there too. You've got your social forces now because people have the choice. They didn't have the choice
Sure.
before to be able to generate their own.
That's right.
And even if they don't do it economically, you've
Yep.
got the first people who want to uptake it just because they can.
Yep.
So they don't have to even make an economic decision.
No, that's right. And that's, you know, you're there selling bananas and you've got the cheapest bananas and no one wants to buy your bananas. It's not, you know, like, it's, they just want to grow their own bananas at a more expensive price than you want to produce them. Like we've all grown tomatoes, haven't we? Yeah. We've all had a go. We've grown tomatoes and you put hours of labour into them. You've gone down to the shop and you've got maybe $4 worth of tomatoes at the end of it. And you go, no, I'm doing that again next year.
Not the same.
Not the same. No, they don't taste the same, do they? That's right. That's what people like with electrons. They're not my electrons. So the lessons from a strategy point of view are, where possible, embrace the future. So you're less likely to go wrong if you embrace those social changes, embrace these new technologies, take any carbon risk out of your asset portfolio. Be a good parent. So you've got owner logic. Are you the best, highest valuating owner of this asset? Okay. Do you have enough scale in your renewables distributed business to actually be able to spin it off? So, okay, we dabble in it, but if we don't have enough scale to actually let it create its own entity and fund its own HR department and go on and do that, then there's an issue around scale there. Okay, so even though we're talking about these two things, is make sure that, you know, both of them have got enough scale in terms of businesses that could be spun off. Right. I want to just make sure I cover all this off. And the last, which I sort of brought up, someone brought up when we were talking about parent advantage, is, are your assets at a discount to their market value? So are you not just, are you applying a parenting disadvantage, basically, is the question there. It's like, are you such a bad owner that separated these assets would be worth more than under your framework? In terms of this transition, from a strategy point of view, you also want to look at what can you leverage. You may be able to, if you're a big retailer, put some ads on TV, use your customer network, and maybe start installing, using that and some scale to install your own solar and batteries and start getting them to work as distributed grids, or set up some sort of blockchain trading or something like that, that may, you know, mean that you can start to step into that new world as your old stuff dries up, okay? And maybe you can just leverage that brand recognition that you've got. Most of us are probably with smaller retailers, but people there are, Energy Australia, still a strong brand. AGL's very well recognised and trusted. So what can you leverage within your existing? So if you can start to take what you're good at and your network and start to leverage that, then maybe you can start to consider how you might transition to this new distributed world. And this is one I sort of threw in at the end there. There's a lot in those however many words it is. It's biased towards letting your assets serve their niche market at a portfolio, level. And that is that idea that you want to put it all together, but if you can let them sort of manage go into their own markets as best you can, then in the event that you do need to split them off, they're kind of already operating where they need to be. And that's hard. That's like bias, you see, because the other side of it is you should actually be using a portfolio approach as a parent, but you want to, if you can, bias towards letting them serve those markets. So this is the key bit, okay? People in the who are working for the big retailers, this one here, I'll put it in pink, mate, just to make it stand out, right? And there's a lot of problems with this, okay? But it's the best way that I could come up with to try and unpick this issue from a shareholder value point of view, right? And that is to keep your centralised assets and your distributed assets managed separately, like two different business units, from a strategy point of view, from a governance point of view, from an accounting point of view. And so if you can let them be managed separately, that if there ever is a need, as a CEO, as you try and run through this minefield with fog and landmines everywhere, and you try and scale that pane of glass of trying to do this transition with all of your assets, your distributed and your centralised under one portfolio, if you manage them separately and you can keep those accounts separate, then you may be able to demonstrate to the market, to investors, that you're giving them the greatest optionality in terms of how you manage these assets. And you may be able to prove that you have, compared to comparables in your market, you may be the highest valuating owner in the low-cost centralised market and the highest valuating owner in that in the distributed market. If you can compare that to pure play, okay. So like for like. If you can compare, does everyone follow that? That's quite, because it's a bit of it's a sort of, I'm getting into some geeky finance stuff here, okay? But that's basically what you're trying to do, is if you can compare it and you say, hey, we're outperforming, yeah, sure, all the centralised guys lost 15%, but we only lost 10. The CEO might keep his job and say, we're the highest performing, we're the best performer in this class. And if you separate the strategy, the governance, the accounting, you can demonstrate that. But if you don't, it all just looks like it's going backwards, you're not in control, you don't know what you're doing, what's your strategy, you're all over the place. And so it gives you the maximum flexibility in spinning off those assets, should there be a strategic need to do so, minimises all of these problems of how you manage and the issues to do with share price and remunerating staff and getting KPIs aligned, etc. If you are going to do this, you're going to need to have a great, well executed, well communicated, understood by the market, and you're going to need shareholder buy-in for this transition plan. But it's going to be complicated. It's going to be messy, and unless you've got the market understanding it, your investors understand, everyone buying into it, it's most likely to end in a split. That's what the lessons are.
So that last point there is what AGL's doing at the moment with their marketing campaign, started to
No. So that's their market. To break those into two markets, they're talking to their consumers. They're different to their shareholders. And you can argue that they are talking to their shareholders. A lot of them watch TV and see that stuff as well. But coming back to, I'm just going to follow right on because you've queued the next slide up beautifully, is that investors are the key here, okay? It's not just technology that is going to be tearing these companies apart. Investors are going to join in. And so if you can convince your investors that you've got a good strategy that is going to minimise those losses, that you are the best value owning asset in both of those separate markets as they continue to diverge, they might let you keep going, okay? But if you can't, there will be a bias towards them wanting to tear you apart, because it's much easier for you to allocate that capital at a portfolio level yourself. You can just say, I want to allocate 30% of my money to centralised stuff and 70% to high growth. It's much easier for you to do than to unpick a very complicated corporate strategy that involves diverse assets in diverse markets with diverse corporate strategies. It's much easier for you to just go, I'll just pick that apart. And investors, that's what they will increasingly do. They will say, no, I'll allocate it how I want it. Don't you worry about that. You just focus on, I want to know what your corporate strategy is. And If you can convince them and they know that you're a Tesla, they know what market Tesla's going after. It's very easy to communicate. Do you know what market Energy Australia is going to go after, or AGL is going to go after? They're sort of saying they're green, but yet they've got all these assets, and then they've got this fossil fuel. Like, what are they really going after? And that can confuse investors. They're like, what's the strategy? Are you a distributor? And so that would be, if you any shareholders, you ask them, what's our strategy here? Are we going to pursue a distributed or centralised generation strategy? Here's one for your AGM. So that'd be just an interesting question. How are they going to answer that? Okay. At an investor level, you ask that question. So this last slide is for you. Okay. What market are you in? Are you in the centralised market? In the distributed market? Are you going to get good at software? What are you going to get good at? And that as these companies get split up, they will get increasingly specialised. So it's much more likely that they will have very different dividend policies. So the high growth people won't pay any dividends. They won't have a lot of debt. They'll be constantly raising capital to grow. Their return on equity, they'll basically have like a tech profile. They'll stop being what you consider as a utility and start being more like a tech stock. Okay? They will attract money and strategic capital from very different people. And that's part of one of the things that's interesting is when an AGL or an Eon or someone goes to market and goes, we want to raise some money, go, what are you doing? What's your strategy? And what am I investing in here? And so unless you can, whereas the tech guys come along and go, here it is, here's the battery, here's the software management system, here's the market we're going after, here's your cash, off you go. You know exactly what they're doing. There's no confusion, there's no evolution of it over time. And at any given instant, they can communicate exactly what their corporate strategy is. And that I mentioned that I will bring that up, following on from that last slide as well, is the idea around pure plays. If you're trying to compare the performance of your different assets compared to pure plays, you do have to remember, as I said, there's a lot of problems with that. In Australia, countries like Australia, we don't have a lot of pure play distributed companies to compare you to. Okay, that's more sort of based at the American audience. You know, they have Teslas and lots of inverter companies that really target those niches, that they can develop an index off the back of and see how you perform relative to that distributed index. And then compare that to some centralised fossil. We don't really have companies like Energy Australia, they're not listed. You can't see how you're performing relative to them because they're not listed. So it's very difficult. AGL's listed, but it's not, you could argue, no longer a pure play centralised generator. It's got some wind and solar and stuff. So finding good comparables is one of the big flaws in this. But yeah, you will have examples where you can kind of get a bit close to it. Okay, so we have run over, haven't we, Noah? Of course we have. I was up here. I have a tendency to do that. So, is there any questions? Sorry, so we've got time for a couple of questions. We've asked questions as we've gone along, actually. So that's probably good.
Manage maybe 2 minutes of questions.
Yeah, sure. Go. We've asked them as we've gone along, but then we've got any burning questions. Have we addressed the burning questions? Is everyone? What should we do with our shares?
Don't know.
On over here. Sorry. Yes.
I'm a bit confused about how you define a centralised or a distributed company. Like a centralised company could well have solar farms or wind farms supplying.
Indeed, it could.
Grid.
Indeed, it could.
Could have batteries to.
Yep.
Balance out the load, etc.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
But then that's going to eat into its coal assets.
Yes. Yep.
And even gas assets.
It's a good point about whether you've got are wind farms decentralised or not, or so within that you can argue you can kind of then even go down further niches of rabbit holes, which are very much the solar and battery storage on an individual roof versus, but then the question is then do you consider decentralised to be a town with a small large scale solar? Is that decentralised or is it?
A large microgrid.
Yeah, a large microgrid. So this is the problem. But the only point to make is that it's not centralised anymore. It is more decentralised. So that, you could have a town of 100 people or whatever it is, and they could have their one large scale in the middle, and it's not truly individual houses, but it's something large scale. But it's a good point. Yeah.
Last year I was over in Broome.
Yeah.
And I was surprised by the lack of PVs on the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And on inquiry, it turns out that the local council, which runs a gas-fired electric system, won't allow them to put PVs on the roof.
Mm-hmm.
So how much can regulations stop this to be able to protect capital?
So it can have a go. It can have a go. But just like you can have a go at trying to stop Uber, if you like. But ultimately, you know, you can have a go. But at the end of the day, it's a very brave government that goes, no, I won't let you put what you want on your roof and what you want in your garage. It's just hard. So
they just simply say you won't get gas-fired plant. It'll just be have everything your own.
Yeah.
Get your own generator.
Yeah. So there's regulatory risk in all of this. Yeah. So, but it's
Well, I think we're going to wind it up there. Would you please thank Matt?
Thank you. Thank you.
Matt, are you able to join us down at the pub?
Certainly, we'll do.
Find a few more questions?
Yes.
Okay,
please.
so to get from to the pub from here, go back into Swanson Street, turn left, go up to Elgin Street, turn right, and the pub is on your right just before the next of the lights.
It's the usual pub.
Makes sense? The usual
Yeah,
pub.
fine. Yeah,
Usual
okay.
pub. Yes. Okay, so BZE survives on what we call baseloaded support. These are people who pledge to provide BZE with a small amount of money every month. That's a good way to run the organisation because it's not beholden to corporations or politics or anything like that. It keeps it an independent organisation. So if anyone thinks BZE is a good thing to invest in and they don't already, we'd be very glad to hear from you. You can catch up on the recordings of these sessions at bze.org.au/events/. The next discussion group is on Monday the 4th of September and the venue is back here again. Is that right, Miwa?
Yes.
Yes, so we're back here again on the next month. We're going to have 3 speakers from Sustainability Victoria who will present on something called Take 2. Some of you may have seen a bit of information on that. BZE is a founding member of Take 2, which is the Victorian Government's collective climate change initiative supporting all Victorian individuals and organisations to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And we'll see you then. Thank you very much.